Hello and welcome to Referendum TV, where today, in something of a coup for us, we are joined by Blair Jenkins. Hello Blair, welcome.
Nice to see you, Kevin.
Nice to see you too. Have you seen our work previously, or have you heard about it?
Yeah, I did from time to time during the referendum. So yeah, I mean, it's good to see it there.
12 days since the event. How are you feeling?
Still emotionally raw. I think, like everyone else who was involved in the campaign, it was obviously a major disappointment and a difficult thing to go through. The fact that we knew we were close to winning and then not to win. Yeah. So I think everyone at the moment is working through the emotional reaction to that, which is why you probably won't get an awful lot of clever analysis from me. You'll get it's more of an instant reaction. Everyone's still digesting and absorbing it. But of course, one of the great things has been how quickly people want to focus on how we move forward and how we take the energy and the enthusiasm forward.
Am I allowed to talk about how we move forward, or is that somebody else's domain? I mean, what's your role just now? Are you still the head of the Yes campaign?
Well, Yes Scotland still exists as an entity because there's work to do in terms of how it's wound down, and then there's obviously a debate about is there not a role for Yes Scotland going forward. So that's something that's being explored.
I interviewed Colin Fox, and I keep on referring to it because it did strike me as his zealousness was infectious. He said that for him, he wanted another 2 years of campaigning. Do you share that view?
Well, the remarkable thing about the campaign, one of the many remarkable things, was how much everybody enjoyed it. Right. And that was so heartfelt and so genuine. So, I mean, I can think of...
Everybody in the Yes group?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I thought that was always one of the key differences between the two campaigns, was that we really looked like we were enjoying it. We were having a good time. A very important issue, a very important referendum subject, but people actually really enjoyed the campaign. So veterans, who've been campaigning, for instance, for the SNP for 50 years or more.
You're a young veteran, Colin, are you?
Veterans were saying to me, it's the best campaign I've ever been involved in, and they really, really loved it, and that was something to do with the energy.
Was that something you set up when you started the campaign, when you started to organise the Yes organisational structure? Did you set that up as a theme that you wanted to imbue the operation?
I thought it was very important to get the tone right from the start. I thought it was very important that the tone was positive and inclusive. So the thing was not to put any barriers in the way of people coming under the Yes umbrella, who might not previously have been supporters of independence or supporters of the SNP, for example, but who would think that we had made a good case, had something to say, and that there was an energy and a positivity around the campaign that they could plug into.
But that's something to do with your leadership, clearly, Blair. I mean, your first appointment was a mutual friend, a guy called Stuart Kirkpatrick, who was head of Yes Digital, that's right?
That's right, yeah.
So when you made those appointments, you were looking at obviously talented individuals, energetic individuals, but you were also setting the ethos of optimism and buoyancy of approach, really.
Yeah, I think that was really important. I always thought that there would be challenges that the campaign would face, many challenges, but the opportunity for us was to really do something different. It always seemed to me that this was much, much bigger than party politics, and the key to winning or having a chance of winning was to bring as many people into the campaign as possible who were not from a political background. Now, it helped that I'm not from a political background.
No, you're from broadcasting background.
And I'm not in any political party. So I think it was key. It was key right from the beginning, I think, that so many people were coming into the Yes movement, and we saw it as a movement very early on. We started talking about a movement rather than a campaign quite early on.
That was a frame you set.
Yes,
because of the inclusive.
I always thought that the campaign had to be about the strength of the grassroots campaign. The first week I was in the job, or rather the week when my appointment was announced at the end of June 2012, there was an opinion poll that week which had Yes at 27%. And someone said to me, or a journalist had said to me, well, that's clearly, it's impossible, you can't get a Yes majority. And almost as an arithmetical point, I said, well, all it needs is everyone who's already voting Yes to persuade one other person, and we have a majority. And I said that in a couple of interviews, and it became one of the things we started saying as a campaign. So very quickly, I started getting people stopping me in the street saying, oh, well, I've convinced one or two or three, and people had the idea that their job was to persuade other people. So I always saw the nature of the campaign as conversational in its essence, that this was about people, millions of conversations around Scotland, where people were talking to folk that they knew and liked and trusted, and that was what would be the strongest way of sharing the Yes message.
They get reassurance, they get convincers from their friends.
Yeah.
Are you going to miss Blair McDougall?
Well, yeah, we got on pretty well, Blair McDougall and I. We took part in some public debates. We did a lot. I couldn't tell you how many broadcasting.
A lot. You were a constant. It was like salt and pepper.
Yeah, I always like to make the important point that I was the first Blair. I was appointed before Blair McDougall, which I think is an important point to make. Like most people who were on the other side of the argument, we were able to have a perfectly good civil relationship, cordial relationship, and talk about things in a reasonable way, which I found to be the case all the way through the referendum campaign. There were very, very few people on the other side with whom you couldn't maintain a pretty good relationship while having a different view.
But that's in part your personality, I would suggest.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. I'm more naturally someone who would look for points of similarity rather than I wouldn't be someone who's deeply adversarial, and I don't go in for personal attacks. And that I thought was very important for the Yes campaign, was that we had that kind of approach. But I think it was very important also that the way that the people behaved who were in the public roles for the campaign, I was sure would affect the way that people at large behaved. Well,
absolutely.
People who were representing the campaign on public platforms, particularly broadcast where you get the very large audiences. I felt if we were very positive and inclusive and reasonable and measured, that would become almost a tone that other people would adopt.
Well, you had to sell the benefits, didn't you? You had the status quo on one hand. Well, it was the status quo originally, then it got some additional features which were the vows, and you had to sell the benefits of changing the status quo. So you're going to have to sell that in a positive light. So what do you think, now that we know a wee bit more about the results, if you've looked at the Ashcroft politics, what did we do very well and where did we fall short?
Well, I think the campaign, by common consent, was a really, really good campaign. I was saying before we got to the vote itself that what we mustn't do is win the campaign and then lose the referendum.
Right.
Arguably that is what happened. I think by common consent, yes, Scotland ran the better campaign. We couldn't get over 50%. There are people who've spent longer crunching numbers in Scottish politics than I have, who tell me that this time around anyway, that 50% wouldn't have been attainable. In fact, a lot of people told me 45% wasn't attainable.
Right, they were still at the 30% level, those kind of folk.
Or that somewhere in the upper 30s was the upper limit. I always believed that we could win. Right from the start, I always thought we could win. And I believed that all the way through until polling day.
I think it's consensual that the Yes group won, the Yes movement won the campaign. But the actual vote itself didn't come through for us. Why?
I don't think there's a proper analysis been done of that yet, and it may be that anything that does emerge wouldn't necessarily come up with one clear reason why.
Oh, it's multi-dimensional. We're clear on that.
There was something, right? So there was something about the people. A number of people who voted no have been in touch with me since the vote, I should say. All of them saying that it was the offer of more powers that convinced them in the end to vote no. Now, some of them I think were voting no anyway. Some of them were genuinely undecided. I don't think any of them had moved from yes, as it were. But now, there may well be some truth in that. There's no doubt that there was that choreographed, orchestrated presentation of a substantially enhanced form of devolution.
I thought you were talking about the guy with choreographing the 60 MPs in Sauchiehall Hall Street to the tune of the Imperial March from Star Wars.
That was one of the musical highlights of the campaign, certainly, and an example of some of the creativity that was around, and that was a great feature of the campaign.
It was a wonderful feature of the campaign. It's something I want to come back to, because I've spoken to quite a lot of people now, and the creativity. I was speaking to Kevin Williamson again last night about the creativity that's been unleashed. When creativity is unleashed, you can't put it back in a box.
No.
So the idea that the 45%, these people who knew in advance that we wouldn't break 50, to a certain extent, the creativity is out there and it's changing things as we speak, day by day, as people experience it or see the results of it in terms of poster campaigns or various other graphics. But if we come back to the multi-dimensional aspect of why we didn't arrive at plus 50, what do you think that was down to? What aspects?
Well, it was something to do with the scare stories at the end of the campaign, that penultimate fortnight, that last fortnight and week of the campaign. There was something in that was definitely going to have an impact on people in terms of the banks, the financial institutions issuing dire warnings.
Well, they brought the fear.
Aye, so it was a combination probably of the the final Project Fear fortnight, if you like, and the offer, the Gordon Brown-led offer of substantial enhancement of the devolved settlement. Something around that, I think, had an influence. Exactly what the weight of that was, and then to what extent maybe people did just step back or whatever. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, because there was a lot of people, because it was quite a fluid situation. Certainly beginning of August through to the end of August, it seemed to be quite a fluid situation in the polls, and then entering into September, and all of a sudden you get people coming out of semi-retirement to perform, animated miracles and promise all sorts of things, and then three leaders of British national parties national parties in Britain rather, coming up here to sell their wares on the front page of the Daily Record. We're not going to talk about the future, but we might just cast a wee eye towards it.
Yeah.
Are these vows deliverable, do you think, in the current political process?
It's challenging. The timescale looks tight, and there seems to be a lot of disagreement among the Westminster parties on what exactly they have in mind.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be completely and utterly cynical about it, because I wouldn't be my natural response.
No, you're not a cynical man. Don't disappoint us.
So I don't want to say that there wasn't integrity in certainly in what some of the people were saying, obviously, I hope that is delivered, and I think the job of those of us who've been heavily involved in the Yes movement is to make sure that the Westminster parties do deliver on what was promised, because I think that was a very important part of the final decision that people reached. Now, we know that at the beginning of the campaign, it was demonstrated in poll after poll that had a substantially enhanced form of devolution been on offer, there was a convincing majority for that in Scotland.
There was a heck of a risk that David Cameron took.
Yeah.
Not to have Devo Max in the paper and effectively bring Devo Max in at the last minute. Do you think that will, again I'm asking you to go to the future, do you think that was a wise gamble, or do you think it was a gamble too far?
Well, it almost went badly wrong for him, because he did bet the ranch on winning a straight yes-no vote, and he knows, he'll know himself how close he came to losing. I'll just
translate that. What he means is he just bet the croft.
He came very close to losing it. I mean, there's no doubt there were different points of the campaign at which we knew they seriously believed they were at risk of losing the referendum, including as we got towards the final 2 weeks. So it was an amazing risk in many ways to take. As someone who believes in Scottish independence and who thinks that's the right direction for the country, obviously it suited me and it suited Yes Scotland that it was a binary vote, that it was a straight vote between yes and no. At the point where I started in the chief executive role, it was still slightly up in the air as to whether there may be 3 options on the ballot paper or 2. But in the end, it was a straight yes-no, which for a supporter of independence was a better outcome, because I did not believe that the Westminster parties could produce a coherent offer in terms of substantially enhanced devolution,
and get it passed.
And I don't think they did. I don't think they did. Now people are taking them on trust to a large extent without seeing an awful lot of meat on the bones. So we know in the UK that one of the real issues about our democracy in the UK has been the breakdown of trust between people and politicians, between the electorate and those who are there to serve them. I think if there were to be any backsliding, reneging on the promises that were made, then you're further eroding what's already a very, very thin element of trust between people and those in power.
I think it's a very interesting point. What astonishes me, given the level of mistrust of politicians, that people actually made that leap. But I think, as you say, in the last 2 weeks, the Project Fear fortnight, where they really brought it home in terms of the stories in all the media and the broadcasters, and the infamous Nick Robinson incident, we'll come to that later on, it was a distorted prism with which a lot of people viewed the messages that were getting sent to them, and that could switch the teeterers to the no side. So I think it'll be, as you say, it'll be in the delivery, if they can manage it at all, given their own internal political politics in their parties.
Yeah.
Let's just. Are you happy it's over?
No, not at all. I would have been happy that it was over had we won. It now feels like clearly it's a major disappointment that we didn't win, and that will last for some time. But equally, I think it's also important to be very positive about what was achieved and to move on. Now, am I glad to have got my life back? At the moment, yes.
Well, the way your phone's going over there, it doesn't sound as if you are. It's beeping every second.
Well, yes, it's still busy. But I really enjoyed the campaign. For all that we were working flat out and everyone was exhausted, we were really enjoying it because the people were fantastic. The people right around Scotland, the volunteers and the grassroots campaign, the community campaign, they just gave you energy because they were so enthused. They were doing so much work. And there was a great feel around the whole thing. And I mean, so that's something. One of the reasons why there's been a degree of there's this huge desire to keep this going out there among yes people.
Absolutely.
It's partly because people were so much enjoying the friends they'd made, the bonds that they'd formed.
Absolutely.
And it was a very, very special thing for people.
There was an openness and acceptance of the new, which was really unusual. Can I get a bit Churchillian? A bit of a fan of Churchill in certain respects, and the Battle of El Alamein, when it was won, and he made that famous speech. He said, "This is not the end. This is not the beginning of the end. Perhaps we can say this is the end of the beginning." In terms of the move towards independence, at this stage where we are just now, 12 days since the vote-ish, that stage is over, and now the Devo Max discussion or the Devo Vow discussion takes place. That's an ongoing process. If we can focus back to the campaign for a wee second, what did you enjoy about it most? What were your highlights?
Definitely for me, it was visiting communities right around Scotland. I mean, I tried to get to as many places as I possibly could and do as many canvassing sessions as I could and do as many meetings as I could, public meetings as I could. And I loved doing that because you met the most wonderful, wonderful people. So I loved that and the energy you got from that. But I think the fact that for most of the people who are involved, I think, and certainly this is true for me, this is something, it's the only campaign I would have got involved in. It's a campaign for Scottish independence. I'm not someone who would join a political party, and I'm probably, because my background's in journalism and broadcasting, I've been much more used to reporting on campaigns rather than taking part in them. But I knew I wanted to be part of this campaign.
Why this particularly?
I think I've felt for some time, for quite a long time now, that independence was the right direction of travel for Scotland. It was the best way to guarantee that we could get the kind of country, the kind of society that we wanted. And I do believe, I'm sure you're going to ask me this, but I do believe independence is inevitable. I think Scotland will become an independent country.
That's what the El Alamein quote was about.
It's a question of when, and that that will depend upon, frankly, mainly upon when the Scottish people next want to have a referendum. It will happen at some point, and it'll be a coalition of circumstances. It'll be the building on what's already been achieved. But I think that it was just such a great campaign to be part of because of the what we felt was the importance of the issue at stake and the chance to really change Scotland. I mean, I'm very proud of many aspects of the campaign. What are you proudest of? I think the way we brought so many people into it who'd never ever been in politics, and the fact that it was such a positive experience. I mean, the Saturday before the referendum, I was in a number of different places, but I mean, the highlight for me was being on the main street in Rutherglen, where yes supporters were right down both sides of the main street and talking to folk and had stalls. There was a samba band playing. There was all sorts going on, and it just felt like the most fantastic celebration of democracy, of life.
Yes,
and that's what people, I think, tuned into. And that's what people. The people, I think, responded well to the campaign, and of course took ownership of it largely. I mean, which was tremendous. I think
absolutely. But it was the people versus. I mean, that musical highlight in Sauchiehall Street. When he was playing that tune, "Bow Down Before Your Imperial Masters," it was kind of like the people versus the institutions. It seems to me, and I wanted your thoughts on this really, that the institutions of the British state came to the fore in a way that I didn't anticipate as strongly as they did. I don't know if you had anticipated that the Treasury would be involved the way it was, that Danny Alexander would use, civil servants the way that they were used to proffer information that really should have stayed within their own organisations. Or, for example, the BBC would come out in quite the way it did.
Well, leaving the BBC for a minute, I think in terms of the UK government and its various departments, yes, I did assume that they would throw everything that they possibly could at us. And that the more it looked as though...
What, the alien landings and stuff like that?
Just about everything was possible, I thought. And the more likely it looked that we were going to win, the more that would step up and the more they would throw at us. So from my point of view, right at the beginning of the campaign, because we knew there would be this barrage from the UK government, we knew that they would be largely, almost entirely supported by mainstream media, that the way to counter that was through our strength in a grassroots sense, that community-based campaign, make that really strong, and to be really, really strong in our own platforms on social media.
Yeah, which in terms of the metrics for when Stuart Kilpatrick, the digital director, in terms of the metrics that he reported, they were being trounced. The No campaign was being trounced. But I suppose a colleague of mine, John Drummond, used the metaphor that we had no aircraft. You know, we were firing, we were trying to defend ourselves from this onslaught where the opposition had the aircraft, that we never really had much in the way to fight back. What's your thoughts on that? Because it seems, it's more like a guerrilla campaign that you were leading there.
It felt that way at times. I did feel that...
Blair Jenkins, ladies and gentlemen. you can have that.
Thank you, Kevin.
Do
I get a berry?
Yeah, get this man a berry.
I think that it did feel like that at times. At times it did feel, I mean, I don't want to over-dramatise, but it did feel at times like you were taking on the full might of the British state. I mean, that's how it felt.
Absolutely.
And
that's how it looked.
You just felt that there was this absolute bombardment coming in from the UK government and
the business.
Yeah, the institutions that could influence the government itself, a largely compliant media from their point of view, all of that coming in. And what we had against it was the strength of our volunteer base, the fact that we were trying to get our message out face to face, community by community, street by street, and the fact that there was that very, very strong effort on social media, which was, yes, Scotland was a big part of that. It's important to say, and you'd know this, that there were other parts of the social media world which are very strong for yes as well. So there are a number of powerful players there.
And Facebook and Twitter were dominated.
Yeah, a number of organisations which I think were hugely important. I mean, we always thought it, as we said, it had to be a national movement. It wasn't a political campaign, it had to be a national movement. So when things like National Collective emerged, Women for Indie, Business for Scotland, all those entities, Generation Yes, there are quite a number.
Name them all, there's only 350.
Well, there's loads of them,
Exactly.
and they were all great. And the good thing was, the great thing was, I think, was how, in a way, over the course of the campaign, and certainly by the time you turn the corner from 2013 into 2014, all those strong voices that had emerged for Yes had worked out kind of what their role was, what their place in the landscape was.
Spontaneously almost.
So we didn't bump into each other, because everyone kind of knew what their role was, and it was a highly, we instigated the local network and set up the local groups, and then tried to make it very community based. But then there were all these other things started happening, which were entirely self-generating and organic in the way that a genuine movement has to be. And that was great. So there are all these different sources of energy.
I was speaking to Ash Regan Denham, who was with Women for Indie, and she covered the borders area, and she was making the statement. This was last night. I said she was making the statement that without Women for Indie, she would not have had a platform to be she would not have been available to be put on platforms across the borders to put the Women for Indie / Yes campaign. So it organised resources and allowed people to be platformed. Just in terms of the No campaign, just for a wee second, if you will. I mean, I know your decency will not permit you to be cynical or very critical at all, but did they miss a trick by not going for a positive vision of the union early?
That's an interesting point. I mean, that was certainly an option. You could have run that kind of campaign, and they decided not to. I think they took the view, and I don't have any inside knowledge in this, but from everything they did, I think they took the view of winning a majority, however small, win a majority, and that the best way of doing that was essentially to highlight the negatives of independence rather than the positives of Scotland being part of the UK. I think they thought that was probably the best way of preventing us from getting to 50%. So, having set out their stall in a fairly negative way early on, I think even had they wanted to depart from that, and there were one or two speeches,
Well, they became politer, didn't they? They
Yeah.
became politer. They went away from no to no thanks.
Well, that's right. Well, I think they realised that it was too negative. And I mean, the body language was very interesting, because I always said to people who, from whatever part of the movement they came from, if you're on a public platform for Yes, or you're in a television studio for Yes, at the very least, turn up and look like you're happy to be there. Turn up and look like this is a debate you want to be part of, because
Yes.
this was a debate we wanted.
Yeah.
So I mean, and I thought certainly for the first year, any time, and I must have appeared with just about every one of the leading figures in the No campaign in a television studio, and they always looked so miserable about being there. It was like, this is a debate we don't want to be having.
A lot of them did turn up for debates at times throughout the campaign.
Yeah.
That didn't provide a speaker.
That was a feature of the campaign, certainly. I mean, they were heavily based. I mean, some of these are people I've known for a long time, and some of them are people I would regard as friends. So I'm not dismissing them all as not knowing what they're doing. Clearly, that would not be
Or miserable.
Or miserable. Neither of those things would be fair to say. There were some clever and capable people who firmly believed in the case that they were putting forward. But the Better Together campaign was very much focused on the three political parties who were its main sponsors, if you like, and component parts. So in all the public meetings I did, and all the broadcast things I did, I think every single occasion I was coming up against politicians or career politicians or people whose whole lives have been spent inside party politics. They were very much based on those three parties, Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem. And that gave a different flavour, a different tone, I think.
The top-down aspect of it.
Well, we tried as often as we could. We made a feature of trying to put non-politicians onto programmes, into debates, onto public platforms, because we thought this wasn't a party political campaign, and it ought not to look or sound like a party political campaign. So it's very important for us that there was all that energy and creativity and all that language, which wasn't political in nature. And that's
the old rhetorical devices being used. You could possibly say that, I couldn't possibly comment, and that's like...
Well, if you look at, I mean, I think, and again, you'll discount, you have to discount 10 or maybe 20% for the perspective I'm coming from. But I thought all the humour was on our side, and all the energy, all the creativity. I mean, an organisation like National Collective...
I have to disagree with you, Blair. That broadcast about drinking the cup of tea, now that was one of the funniest things.
Oh yeah.
And that was humorous. Whether that was intentional or not, we can argue, but it was very, very funny from where I was sitting, and a lot of other people.
I think a few people did feel that. I grant you that one. But taken as a whole, the energy around, I mean, National Collective, I thought were just great. They kept coming up with really great ideas, great content. But
they worked their wee socks off.
So many people doing that, and it was great to have so many non-political figures. I mean, Elaine C. Smith was a fantastic advocate for Yes, she was great, but so were lots of other people as well.
Irvin Welsh was fantastic as well in that Channel 4 programme.
And one could point to, I mean, I think Martin Compston, the actor Martin Compston, I thought was very, very good for Yes.
Absolutely.
Brian Cox. There were lots of other people who were completely coming from a background of not being politicians. And sometimes, saying things in a way that a politician wouldn't say it, in a more unguarded way.
Yeah, a more confident way rather than...
So that was part of the campaign. But one of the things about Yes that I think was interesting and that I thought worked very well was obviously the largest political party in the Yes campaign was the Scottish National Party, SNP, who have been best known for many years for being a very tightly run, very disciplined political organisation. Yeah. And I think what they quite enjoyed after some initial integration issues, if you like, was the fact that they had this highly horizontal, dispersed, distributed network of volunteers, who most of whom are not in the SNP, who were doing all sorts of things, getting up to stuff, creative stuff, imaginative stuff. I think the people in the SNP who'd been used to a much more disciplined approach were loving the energy of all of that, and it was a terrific thing.
Absolutely. I suppose what I want to come on to, let's get a wee bit particular. I don't know if you're uncomfortable doing this, but nonetheless I'm going to ask it. What stars? You mentioned Martin Compston. Who else? And who else do you reckon's been a standout in the campaign beyond the actual Yes official organisation?
And you don't mean, do you mean politicians as well, or?
Well, if you want to talk politicians.
I mean, Nicola Sturgeon had an outstanding campaign. I thought she just grew in stature all the way through and was great. Patrick Harvey, I thought had a very, very good campaign. Patrick had to manage his own party, not all of whom were necessarily wanting to be involved in the Yes campaign.
That's right,
I thought he did that very well, and he brought a great deal in terms of his sincerity and
his intellect.
Yeah, his intellect, indeed. So Patrick was a very strong performer. I mean, I'm conscious here that I'll probably, if I start listing names, I'll leave off the people that.
It's like an Oscars acceptance speech.
But I know.
Sit back.
I mean, I think by common consent, Philippa Whitford was a great contributor. I mentioned Elaine C. She was terrific. One of the things that struck me was a lot of the young people I appeared with on platforms. If you did school debates or college debates, you'd often find, what they often did was pair you with a student from the school or the college or the university.
Right.
And so many of them were outstanding. I mean, I've said, and I think this is true, that whatever anyone's view of the referendum is, and even for those of us who are disappointed by the result, what I know for sure is that Scotland is going to get a generation of outstanding political talent. Because on both sides of the debate, a lot of young people have come into debate, discussion.
Because they've been brought into contact at such a young age in such an invigorating fashion.
And in honestly in such a way that they wouldn't have expected. So you're getting young people who'd barely spoken in public before on the same platform as a Nicola Sturgeon or a Patrick Harvey, and taking part in those sorts of debates. Now that is I think going to have a fantastic legacy for us, because we're now a society, we're now a country that talks about our values and our priorities and what's important to us, and that's not going to change.
Well, it's a wonderful idea, because what it takes us back to is that notion of the flat structure that you talk about. The Yes movement became, much to the surprise of some in the SNP, but young people being able to meet sort of political stars, if you like, is a very encouraging thing. It gives them an immediacy, and gives that it's not such a faraway place as, say, the Palace of Westminster. It's 2 miles down the road from here, or a mile down the road from here, that you can actually go and see them in person.
Well, one person, in the list of names I went through there, and it's opposite in terms of what you're just saying. Dennis Canavan was clearly a very, very strong figure in the campaign for Yes, in huge demand. We could barely manage the demand for Dennis. He was wanted all around the country.
He does assertion very well, does Dennis?
He really does. But it was Dennis who made the point. Dennis was loving the public meetings, and he did say this was for him. It was like going back to the 60s or the 70s. The type of public meeting you're having, packed halls in towns in Scotland on a Friday night, hundreds of people packed in a hall.
It was incredible.
And that was just that sense of a reigniting of democracy, which is what it felt like, was great. And I think people found themselves. In Dennis's case, he was always a good platform performer, but I think he found himself greatly energised by the campaign, and he enjoyed it. Having initially said that he wasn't sure how much time he could commit to the campaign, a few days a month as chairman of the advisory board, he then became virtually full time. As I think I said, he went from overnight from retired to inspired.
Well, it's an interesting point, because I had Jim Sellers here, and I said to Jim, "So Jim, how many talks have you given?" "Oh, I don't know," he said. He said, "Okay, so just on a daily basis, about 12. I stop about 12 places and I talk for about half an hour each time. So that's 6 hours, and he's 78 years old. I don't want to give away a person's name, but he's 78 years old and could speak with power and passion and coherence. 6 hours a day. That energy level, along with Dennis's and along with lots of other people, was transformative. There's a character that's not been mentioned yet, but I think it's time we did mention him. What do you think of Alex Salmonds' resignation in the wake of the result?
I was surprised that he moved as quickly as he did. Looking at it now, it does look like it was the right thing to do for all sorts of reasons. It's cleared the way for that party to sort out its future and to appoint a new leader, who will certainly be Nicola Sturgeon. I'd assumed that Alec might want to stand down had the referendum been lost, but without knowing what his timescale was in his own mind. And of course, I didn't think about it too much, because I was fully expecting to win. It wasn't something I thought necessarily through. Was well, how quickly would.
We'll come back to that because you've said that a few times now. So I need to now bring my big guns to bear on that. Why did you think we would win, based on the polling that was shown us a little bit off pace?
Well, what the polling companies were saying privately was that they were nervous about their own findings because they knew that they probably weren't, in fact they definitely weren't fully reflecting the level of turnout that there was going to be, and the fact that so many people who don't ordinarily vote were going to vote in this referendum.
So usually about 60% was 84, so it's 24% difference, a full quota.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, an astonishing turnout. I think it's near 85, and on 97% of the eligible adult population having registered to vote. Now, had you said that 2 years ago, people would have thought that was just so unlikely. I mean, people were saying at that stage, you'll get a really good turnout, it'll probably be 70%. So I think, I think the Yes campaign takes more credit than the No campaign for the level of turnout and for getting so many people to register to vote for the first time.
Rick were key in that.
Yeah, they were certainly they played a big part in it. I mean, they particularly focused on a number of parts of Scotland where people had tuned out of the political process. I mean, local Yes groups all around Scotland were going into areas with very low voter turnout in normal elections and making sure people were registered, but Rick were a very significant part of that as well.
Yeah.
We, from everything that we knew and heard from the numbers that were coming back from all around the country, we definitely did think there was a Yes majority there. The modelling that you do in terms of the population as a whole and looking at where you have support, where you don't have support, we definitely did believe there was a Yes majority there. And from everything I understand from the other side, I think they thought there might be a Yes majority there as well and worried about that.
Yeah.
So it was never done and dusted or guaranteed, and we never took it for granted. But we knew in the course of the campaign the momentum was, demonstrably the momentum was towards Yes. It moved our way in the course of the campaign.
It tightened right towards the end, didn't it?
Yeah, and all the polling companies a week and 10 days out had the thing within the margin of error, had it very
3% either way.
Yeah, they're coming in. That's right. There was a bit. I remember there were so many polls. It's hard to remember, but there was a spate of 4 or 5 which almost all said over a 48-hour period, which all had a 48-52 showing, I think, if I remember correctly. So the polls were all coalescing around too close to call, and then there was one poll in particular which showed Yes ahead.
That was the Rupert Murdoch one,
yeah,
where he very cheekily tweeted that it was to almost rattle the British establishment. We'll come back to that because it is a point of curiosity for me. So then what happened? If they were so close to call, but obviously the anxieties around the methodology, but what actually happened then, do you think?
Well, I think, as I said, it's probably too early for me to give you, to be too precise or analytical about that.
Speculative, that's fine.
Well, I think there was something around the final hurrah, the last hurrah of Project Fear, of putting out a whole lot of negative stuff from the big banks and the big financial institutions, the telling people that their jobs would be at risk, their pensions would be at risk, etc. That would have had an impact, and I think the More Powers offer did have an impact. It's hard to say.
It didn't need to be that much of an impact either, because we're talking about a 3% swing of 200,000 people. So on a turnout of 3.2, 3.6 million, or 3.2 I think it was, of 3.2 million.
Yeah.
So it didn't have to be that big a swing. In terms of a great story was made of the Commonwealth Games. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't know. It wouldn't have done any harm. It made the country feel good about itself. It was a fantastically successful event, and people did enjoy it. It also did. I mean, I wasn't sure. It also did. It did actually spell a period, whatever it was, 10 or 11 days, where the campaigning went a bit quieter because the focus was on the Commonwealth Games.
What did you do then? Have a wee rest and go to a few events?
Not really, no. No, I think I don't think I've been to a sporting event or a movie or a play for the last 2 years.
Or the gym.
Or the gym for the last 2 years. So all sorts of things that were neglected, if you like. But it would have had a positive impact, I think, on people. I was never so convinced it would be, a huge
transformer
thing. But it didn't do any harm. It certainly didn't do any harm. It probably also, I think, in their own minds, I think some people, it was clear from fairly early in the campaign that a lot of people were going to leave it till fairly late to make up their minds.
Why would they do that? I mean, I don't understand that.
I think, not everyone is necessarily as fully interested in politics.
Blair's calling me a political geek here. That's essentially what he's saying.
Subtext. So we knew, I mean, one of the reasons, we had to slightly rethink the phasing of the campaign because of this. It became evident, I think, that a lot of people were going to make up their minds fairly late in the day.
Yeah.
And by that they meant coming out of the summer holidays post-Commonwealth Games. So those final 5-6 weeks were going to be absolutely key, and therefore a lot of resource and a lot of the effort had to go into that period. So I think to that extent it was a little bit of a window there where people were able to stand back or pause or something. I mean the general public. I don't mean the two campaign teams, but the general public were able to slightly tune out and focus on the Commonwealth Games. And then say, okay, Commonwealth Games over, summer holidays over, the referendum's coming, let's really focus in on this and take an interest in it. And
well, I did that with the World Cup. Then I had the hiatus when I got back involved in the campaign. Yeah. Then one of the things for me as an Edinburgh guy is that I thought Glasgow was outstanding in the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
The Glaswegians did a tremendous job, though a lot of people were further of Glasgow that came to help out and attend. And in terms of the actual delivery of a yes vote, they did tremendously well.
Yeah. Yes.
Have you got thoughts in terms of the geography and the breakdown? I know you've not got the full analysis. Lord Ashcroft has produced a putative one. What's your thoughts on the actual breakdown of the vote in terms of age, background, what have you?
Well, clearly, I mean, although turnout in Glasgow, for instance, I was very pleased. I live in Glasgow. I was really pleased we won Glasgow. All the indications we had were that we were going to win Glasgow, so I was glad we did.
Right.
And I think that is significant in itself for going forward.
Oh yes.
If you think of it, turnout in Glasgow was 75%, which would be regarded as miraculous in any other electoral context. But because turnout was 90% in other parts of the country, you therefore think, well, okay, you didn't get to quite the same level of turnout there. We probably we didn't get as high a level of turnout in some of the areas which were strongest for yes as happened in some of the areas that were strongest for no. So even in a context where there was going to be probably the highest turnout you could ever get in any electoral event in Scotland.
Scotland, North Korea do it better, obviously.
Yeah, you still had that differential in terms of what level of voting turnout could you get from, for want of a better expression, more middle class parts of the country as opposed to more working class parts.
Did you have, I presume you did, you had calculations in place that if 80% of the vote in Glasgow, like if calculations, if 80% of the vote in Glasgow vote this, then that means that we get this. Did you feel a lot of the areas out with the central belt and the main cities let the yes vote down in the sense that had they come through that higher level would have won overall? Well,
I wouldn't want to think of it in terms of anyone letting people down. I mean, I think the job was clearly to get as big a yes turnout and as big a yes vote in every part of the country as we possibly could, and we put effort in all over. I mean, I ended up, I went to Shetland, which was never
a very nice place. Did you have Reestit mutton?
I don't know, which was never going to be natural territory for yes, but we knew it was very important that in every part of Scotland we got as many yes votes as we can, and there was actually a very good yes group in Shetland.
It was 5% up on 1979.
Yeah, and it was visibly the case in Shetland that there was support for yes. You could see that there was support for yes, and we had some good meetings there. But there were differences geographically around Scotland, and clearly that's if one were learning the lessons as we will have to for going forward.
We will come on to that.
Then it's true that there were parts of the country where we might have anticipated a higher yes vote. Maybe not from where we were 2 years ago, but certainly by the time you get to where you're getting a national average of 45%. There are areas you were hoping would be coming in at
Western Isles a little bit more
above that. Yeah, you could point at different parts of the country, but but the onus always was. I don't. I think it's very important to accept the result, and it's an important thing to do that. And I think it's very important also to accept that the onus was always on the campaign that was proposing change to make the case, and we made it, I think, as well as we possibly could. And one of the good things about as you say, 10, 11 days since the campaign, one of the really good things is how everybody I've spoken to in the yes movement is of the view that, well, we run the best campaign we could. You know, everyone thinks we gave our best shot. We did everything that we possibly could, and that, I think, was very, very important.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, one of the aspects is that it doesn't feel like a defeated movement.
Yeah, that's right.
There's still a lot of fight left in it to go forward with. If we just come back to the development of the campaign, and was there a sense at some stage where it was sort of out of your control?
Well, no, I think it was interesting. There was a newspaper journalist who used that phrase. I mean, because I'd done an interview with him where I talked about the fact that so much of the Yes movement was self-generating and organic, and wasn't centrally directed. It was people getting on and doing stuff, which was always the way we'd seen it and always the way we'd intended and planned it. I think he then, or perhaps it was a sub-editor, turned it into the headline, the Yes campaign out of control, which has connotations which I don't think were nothing like what was intended, because it was always a disciplined campaign in a self-disciplined way. I think people within the Yes movement were all broadly aware of the parameters within which they were operating. So any event I went to, whether it was something we'd organised or something that had come from another part of the movement, these were very generous and open and inclusive events. And I think people had got a sense of the way that Yes did things. And I think that influenced, the nature of the campaign, and that's why I think a lot of people responded to it who wouldn't normally respond to a political campaign.
Because it came down to their level, they could access it more directly. Yeah.
But the role of the core Yes Scotland campaign was get the network up and running, provide it with materials. We obviously did a lot of training in terms of how to hold public meetings, how to canvass, all those sort of things, which are really, really important.
Absolutely.
Because not in every part of the country were the people involved, people who had a lot of experience in campaigning before. And I came to this as someone who'd never been involved in a campaign like this before.
You've done rather well, then, haven't you?
Well, I had a great team, and a team of people who worked their socks off and who really, really put everything they possibly could into it. So that, I think there were clearly lots of things that happened, which were just part of the broader Yes movement, which were wonderful things, which
spontaneous outbursts.
We didn't initiate, but which are fitted organically into where the movement had got to. So once that network of local groups was up and running, and then as it always would, started multiplying, so that we set up a Yes group in each local authority area, and then that became 10 or 12.
Why do you say always would?
Well, I think the tone and the nature of the campaign, and the way we set up the campaign, it was always intended it would bring a lot of people in, and it was always intended that it would become ever more localised and community based. And we obviously had some discussion with some of the groups that came into existence and had some knowledge of what they were doing. And others just came along and were completely self-generating. But we all thought if we got the tone right, and we got the approach and the positivity right, that lots of things would happen. And in the end, that is what happened.
Absolutely. I want to come on to two things. Do you think we were too polite? I mean, I was speaking to Colin Fox about this, and I can't remember what we said, but we were both in agreement that you were far too decent to indulge in such behaviour. I think it was in terms of taking it to a negative position. Do you think we were too decent?
Well, I could only be involved in a decent campaign. I mean, I felt it was very important for the country that it was a passionate campaign, but that it was a responsible campaign, that we were I think, behaving in a proper way. And I actually do think that was one of the attractions of the campaign to a lot of people.
Yes.
Was the fact that we were setting out the case for independence in a reasonable and measured way, in a way that was intended to bring as many people into it as possible, and to make it as attractive an experience as possible for many, many people. So I think that was very important, that we did behave in that way, and I don't think that was a hindrance to the campaign. We did. I mean, we didn't hesitate to point out where the Westminster system was letting Scotland down.
Yeah.
I mean, we did that, and we were heavily critical of the failings of the UK from a Scottish point of view. I can't remember, somebody I think said that there is no such thing as an absolutely positive or an absolutely negative campaign, and that probably the reality was that we were 80% positive and 20% negative, and the other side were 80% negative and 20%. You know, and that maybe there may be something in that. You know.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I came into the campaign through Twitter originally, and some Facebook use, but mainly through Twitter. And there's a certain lord lurking somewhere, gets £300 a day for attending some place, doing very little at all, who came up with the term Cybernets. And I very quickly took that term and put it in my profile because I thought it was a very worthwhile title. I was very proud that I could do something, I could buzz. I could buzz at 2 o'clock in the morning if I just finished a shift or whatever, and say what I had to say. Do you think that got out of hand? Do you think, what's your view on the so-called Cybernets?
Well, clearly a large part of the energy of the Yes movement was, and we've discussed the role that Stuart Kirkpatrick had within Yes Scotland, I mean, was getting a lot of activity, a lot of people involved, contacting and reaching a whole lot of people through social media. And Yes Scotland was reaching 1 million people with some of our content by the end of the campaign on social media platforms. So that was a hugely important thing for us.
Yeah.
In such a big movement, particularly a movement that was bringing in a whole lot of people into politics or into a campaign like this for the first time, you couldn't control what every individual would say. And
Absolutely.
I mean, with the early days of, relatively speaking, of Twitter, and I mean, I don't know if you'll agree with this, Kevin, but most human inventions, whether you're talking about the television or the motor car, they bring their benefits to society. And they do have their downsides as well. They don't. There's very few unalloyed benefits from a new invention.
Absolutely.
Usually, there's a negative and a positive. So what you have with Twitter, particularly, Facebook, but probably particularly Twitter, is you now have a situation where everyone has a megaphone of a sort, and not everyone is going to stay within the parameters of normal debate.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think is true is that there was genuinely a lot of anger out there.
Absolutely. The misrepresentation in the mainstream media, yeah.
Well, there's media behaviour, but also I think we brought a lot of people into the Yes movement who were struggling day to day, week to week, to feed their families, to pay bills, to make ends meet.
Yep.
And there was a lot of anger with the failings of the Westminster system, and you can't. I think across such a large number of people, and where there is an element of anger at the system within that, you can't police that in a way that says you won't get people who say things. Of course, I would regret some of the things that were said.
But it's 5% of the population in Scotland had Twitter, and not everybody is politically sophisticated like you or other individuals, and so sometimes a more straightforward way of saying something would emerge.
Well, that's true, and again, free speech is very important, and provided you're not committing an offence or being wholly unreasonable, then free speech, I think, is a very, very important thing.
Yeah.
It's also worth saying, I think, that one of the things I do regret about the way the No campaign conducted business was both sides were getting abusive stuff, a certain amount of abusive stuff on social media. I know other people in the Yes movement were as well. We weren't drawing attention to that because we didn't think it was typical of the wider No movement, and we thought, well, we're having a very positive, inspiring, democratic debate which is engaging people all around Scotland, and it's going well. So if you've got in the margin, if you've got a bit of activity that you think is not operating in that way, and where people are not behaving responsibly or properly, don't draw attention to that because it's not typical of the wider debate. I do think, for campaign purposes, there was a recurring, if not a constant, attempt to amplify, to talk up what was actually a very unrepresentative segment of behaviour, area of behaviour.
Yep.
Whether that was in some of the things in street campaigns or whether it was in online media, it was hyped to try to give the impression that, look, Scotland, you may think you're going through a really healthy, pleasant process, but really you're not, because let's just shine a light on this.
And they would build the association in that this is a negative aspect of Yes. That's what the attempt would be, to besmirch the goodwill that we were generating.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that was unfair. It was a distortion of the overall campaign, because which I think most people, to be fair, realised, because most people in Scotland were seeing Yes campaigners in their own community, in their own streets, people that they knew, friends and neighbours and so on, and they could see that it was being conducted in a very reasonable and civilised and pleasant and positive and frequently musical way. So that was fine. So I do think it was a somewhat cynical part of the No campaign, supported by some elements in the media, to try to hype up, to talk up, to exaggerate any behaviour that wasn't perfect as part of wider campaign purposes.
It's hard to be perfect all the time. I mean, you're going to have lapses, particularly in 24 hours a day media, whether Twitter or Facebook, particularly if you've had a wee drink or two. So it can happen. Are you allowed to speak at all about what happens now?
Absolutely.
Can you give us a scenario going forward? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I've said already, and I do believe this is independence deferred,
right?
Not independence derailed or anything, or defeated. Mm-hmm. And I think that there will be at some point. I don't know when, and that will happen in its own time. But I do believe there will be another independence referendum, and I do think Scotland will be an independent country. But it's important that the focus now comes on to strengthening the powers of the Scottish Parliament in a substantial and meaningful way. And I think different parts of the Yes movement are beginning to explore how effectively we can campaign, how effectively we can organise to make sure that Westminster does not go back on the promises that have been made. So these are very early days. Everyone is still in recovery, if you like, from the referendum.
Yeah.
But I think it's fairly clear that a lot of the determination and the energy and the perseverance that we saw in the Yes campaign and the Yes movement will carry on in Scotland. It's not going anywhere. It's not going away.
Well, I mean, it isn't interesting. As soon as Alex stands down, his party almost triples in membership. And I'm not putting that down to that, but I do think that's a big surge in support for change, and as well as the Greens and the Scottish Socialist Party.
Well, I spoke to Patrick Harvey yesterday and Colin Fox and Nicola Sturgeon, and I mean, each in their own way have seen huge increases in their party membership, and that, I'm really, really pleased, because each of those parties, in their own way, played a big role in the Yes campaign. I mean, we talked about Nicola, we talked about Patrick. Colin Fox is somebody I've got a very high regard for.
We have to refer to Colin on here as the amazing Mr. Fox.
I wouldn't demur from that. He's two things. He's a hell of a nice guy.
Yes, he is indeed. Yeah.
And he is someone else who just gave it everything. I mean, he really did work very, very hard for Yes, and understood instinctively that Yes had to be a big tent, and it had to make room for lots of people.
But that you held that frame, that you held that big tent together, I think is a personal testament to your quality in leadership in holding that all together. Because
Thank you.
it is a direct compliment. It's a diffuse and diverse bunch. There's a lot of egos at play there. Previous mentions excluded, obviously, but there's a lot of individuals with their own agendas there that you managed to negotiate, shape towards the final goal of Yes, which I think is a remarkable achievement. And for me, just as a bystander, really, I'm very proud of the Yes movement.
Me too.
I admire the qualities you brought to it, Stuart's brought to it, but I think its legacy in terms of the decency and the honour with which it was conducted is a tremendous legacy to the Scottish body politic. And I just want to go on public record to say I think you did a hell of a job.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think it was a great campaign. I'm very proud of what we achieved. I'm very proud of my own role in it. Uh-huh. But I'm so proud of the people who worked at Yes Scotland. I mean, they really did a tremendously good job. They just put everything into it. And right around the country, there were so many fantastic people working for a Yes outcome. So it was, even in the trickiest of weeks, it was an enormous pleasure and an enormous privilege to be doing this. And I enjoyed it hugely. And, I think everyone did.
On a personal level, I'm very honoured to have you here. And I think what you've done is marvellous in terms of your work for the Yes campaign. Blair Jenkins, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all for us today from Referendum TV. Thank you.